When I first visited Psych Quantum's headquarters in Palo Alto a couple of years ago, I felt like probably like my grandmother would have felt visiting, let's say, a 2010 e-commerce startup. It was amazing, and I did not understand how one could coordinate a group of people that are all global leading thinkers in diverse disciplines such as nano-optics, advanced material science, the creation of circuit boards that are much, much smaller than a grain of sand, semicon manufacturing, and of course also the translation of complex math and science problems into algorithms that then run on a machine that didn't even exist. So really a glimpse at the future, I felt. And here's Jeremy, who co-led the thinking and orchestrates that now into the world's first useful quantum computer. I'm personally convinced he will be mentioned in future science books in the same sentence as great physicists like Lise Meitner, Schrödinger, Oppenheimer. Welcome, Jeremy. And as I lined you up now with these great scientists, I want to start with a question. Your personal view as a scientist and technologist on global warming, is it really a threat? Has it been overblown? Have we done enough or maybe even too much in the past years? And also the technologies, these great technologies that we have seen today, will they actually, in your view as a scientist, have an option to answer this problem?
Yeah, thanks very much, Philip, and thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk to you all. The one-word answer is no, absolutely not. I mean, this is the greatest existential threat to civilization that we face, and I'm sure we're talking to the converted here this afternoon. But it has been a disturbing 5 years where ideas like you propose are creeping into public discourse. I used to be a professor of physics and electrical engineering, and I guess around the turn of the century, I started provoking my colleagues. You have to understand this, not least of which because people are going to ask you, right? Like, you're a professor of physics, then you better be able to, give a coherent answer to this. And now I think we're in a situation where, we really need to be doing absolutely everything that we can within our own lives and our businesses and organizations. Starting yesterday, and we've known each other for a while, and so I think you know my view on this, but you asked about technology, and I like to be really crystal clear on this. We humans have had the technology that we need to solve this problem for decades. What we've lacked is the political, social, and economic will to implement those technological solutions. And my view is that technology has a very, very important role to play, and that role is to lower the barriers on all of those three dimensions. And we heard in earlier sessions this afternoon the idea of cost parity, and I think that's the right ambition, or better, right? Like, let's make it cheaper. Now, I believe, based on some really great work that we did in partnership with McKinsey, yourself included, Philip, that quantum computing is kind of the most powerful sort of underpinning tool that you could hope to have in technology as you tackle climate change, as it allows you to accelerate a whole host of other technologies. And you will remember that we tallied up 7 gigatons per annum of CO2 equivalent abatement by 2035. And ramping up to that number from the time that we turn our first systems on in 2027, that's a very big contribution. And so my personal contribution is to get on with building that thing and use it for these applications as swiftly as possible. But I think we all have to be doing everything in parallel. And the way I used to provoke people is that at some point, we're going to need to dam the North Sea so that half of Western Europe doesn't get flooded. I don't know how much that costs, but it must be at least a fraction of $1 trillion, I guess. Perhaps we better get on with, building a quantum computer and deploying it for this or whatever other technologies, as well as, carbon markets and everything else. It's everything all at once.
And before we go more into quantum computing as a technology and what role it can play to actually fight climate change, let's give a brief initiation to the people that do not know all about quantum computing as a technology. So what does it do better or differently than a quote-unquote normal supercomputer?
Yeah, so I think quantum computing suffers a little bit from having the word computing in its title. It is indeed a computer, but it's such a different kind of technology that you should really think of it as a completely different category. So it's a technology that we've understood the principles of for between a quarter and a half a century type of time frame. And if we could build such a system, then we have long understood that it would enable problems that are otherwise impossible to solve on any conventional computer that we could ever build suddenly become possible. And this will give us new mastery over physics, mathematics, and chemistry, for example, that are just unprecedented. I'm amongst a majority who are clear that this is the most profoundly world-changing technology yet, and I want to just quickly highlight why you might understand that. We're not here to talk about the pharmaceutical industry today, but I will for just a minute. That's an industry that we should see as the broken one it is, right? Like we spend billions of dollars a decade plus, mostly to fail to bring new drugs to market. Even when we succeed, their efficacy is often underwhelming, comes with unwarranted side effects, and most egregious to me is that we typically still don't understand how they work. We have drugs that we have been putting into our bodies for decades that we don't understand how they work. I use that industry as an example because obviously it's not lacked for resources to do things better, but it suffers from what I would contend is the situation that we humans cannot start to do chemistry until we have quantum computing. Now that's designed to be provocative, but also true in the sense that if you can't simulate the building blocks of the world that you find around you, never mind the building blocks of the world that you're trying to engineer, then what are you doing? In my mind, what you are doing is you're running a blacksmith's workshop and hoping that F-35 aircraft come out the door. That's what the pharmaceutical industry is doing. Now, to climate, obviously our ability to do chemistry underpins pretty much every climate technology, and indeed, at some level, underpins all of human activity on the planet. And that's why you end up with these profound impacts of this 7 gigatons per annum by 2035.
And what about the AI? Can the AI solve that much earlier and better?
No. So AI and quantum computing are very different. AI is very good at taking vast quantities of data and providing approximate solutions to that. That's what it does. What a quantum computer does is very different. It takes in no data and provides exact solutions from first principles. And actually, these two things are a sort of match made in heaven, if you like, in that we're kind of aware in the context of LLMs that once you've consumed every word ever written or uttered by every human who's ever lived, you've got nothing left to eat. The same applies with chemistry and materials and so on. Again, the pharmaceutical industry, you feed an AI a whole bunch of data. That data has been hard fought and won, right? Like you've had to synthesize those molecules and measure them. The data is only as good as those measurements, obviously, and you are always, at least to start with, exploring an infinite space of potential molecules or materials that you might try and synthesize, and invariably you have data in a vanishingly small subset of that. And so it's clear that we will use quantum computing to get better data and more spanning data, feed that to AIs, take the output of the AI and mark its homework with a quantum computer.
I really like the description of a match made in heaven. Now, there are quantum computers already that exist and work. Why can't we start to work on them then?
Yeah, so the short answer is because they are way too small and way too noisy. So we have systems today in the world with around 100 qubits, where the qubits are the equivalent of the transistors. And it turns out that you need systems with more like 1 million qubits in order to do any useful work on a quantum computer.
And you're competing on that against the largest companies in the world, Microsoft, IBM, Google. Sam Altman recently said PsiQuantum is, along those lines, the only company in quantum computing he believes in. And what gives you that edge? Why and how can you compete against these gigantic companies?
Yeah, I guess I would try to describe it as three things. One is the approach. The second is focus, and the third is a head start. So let me just elaborate on that. The approach is really what I alluded to in the last question, which is that we founded a company very clear and embedded in its core belief system that utility meant million-qubit scale systems, whereas the rest of the quantum computing industry spent the better part of the last 10 years hoping that they would find something useful to do with those much smaller, noisier systems that we have today. We made that bet based on some very good technical understanding, and it's a bet, right? Like those other organizations, they're smart people, right? They made a different bet. So that led us down the path of a very different approach, which was to utilize the semiconductor industry to make a quantum computer. That's been my sort of 25 plus year mission, is to figure out how do we do that? Because if we're not doing that, it's not happening in my lifetime. So that's sort of the approach, a photonic approach. I won't go into the detail of that, but it took 20 years of university research to uncover that path, and then several years and several $100 million to get into a tier one semiconductor manufacturing facility, and then several more years and a whole pile more money to be at the point where we're mass manufacturing the chips that go into our first utility scale systems, million-qubit scale systems, to be built in Australia in 2027 and Chicago in 2028. So we took a good approach. We only do one thing at Psych Quantum, which is build and deploy utility scale quantum computing. That helps. That helps immensely. There's a singular mission, and it hasn't changed for the near on decade that we've been doing that. And then, yeah, I mean, the head start is that we just started almost a decade ago, heading in that million qubit direction, whilst everyone else headed in what is actually an orthogonal direction of getting to those small noisy systems.
I think it was last week when the news broke that Psych Quantum and Microsoft are the last two companies in quantum computing that have received or have gotten into the last stage of the DARPA funding program for quantum computers at utility scale. The DARPA, by the way, some of you might not know it, is the US Defense Secretary Agency for Advanced Research Programs, and brought to the civil society things like the internet, weather satellites, GPS systems, the graphical interface for computer, and so on and so on. So that sounds like a pretty significant achievement as well.
Yeah, I think that's very welcome news, obviously, for us. We have been working with DARPA for 4 years, including the last couple of years as a participant in their utility scale quantum computing program. I think as part of their announcement that we've graduated into that final phase, they declared that they have the best quantum computing, assessment and validation team on the planet, and I think that's probably a fair self-assessment by them. But the point being that it's very meaningful to us because we faced a highly adversarial 50-person technical team drawn from across the US government, national labs, etc. And they really started from the position of, you can't build a utility scale quantum computer, and even if you did, it wouldn't have any commercial value. So that's a welcome kind of red team type dynamic. If you then have them change their tune to really be backing you in a big way and indeed having gone into huge levels of depth on the technical, milestones, roadmap, supply chain, etc. Yeah.
And we heard a couple of times now that the shifts in geopolitics. Do we need a DARPA in Europe?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's really important. This is important in what we're all here to talk about, climate and green tech, but it's also more broadly important just that nations have access to expertise. That people in a very fast-moving world that they have access to these expertise. In the case of Australia, they've made $1 billion scale investment for us to build our first, the world's first utility scale system there. They did that via the chief scientist assembling a team, not dissimilar to DARPA, and spending 18 months. So it's possible in an ad hoc fashion to do that sort of thing, I think, at a national and supranational level. But I think if you have organisations that are tooled up, ready to engage on such things, I think it's just beneficial, particularly as our legislators and policymakers have an ever increasingly challenging task to assess everything, but particularly in technology that's coming down the line, to give an unbiased assessment on it.
Now, in the context of quantum computing being an answer, a potential contributor in the fight against global warming, what are, let's say, your top problems that you're most excited about that become actually solvable once the quantum computer runs at 1 million qubits?
Yeah, it's hard to choose a favorite or several, because there are a lot of them, and I'll maybe talk in detail about one or two and mention maybe the others. I think my personal favorite application is direct air capture. I think we have to do this, right? Like we have to take some of the many gigatons that we've put up there back out, right? As well as doing all the other things in parallel. And as folk know, we have pilots, around the world for these sorts of things, but we're yet to really find a, economically compelling way to do that. And it's challenging, right? Because as we all know, we're measuring CO2 in, hundreds of parts per million, 420 parts per million. So you need a very, very specific sorbent for capturing that. And then, of course, you can pump it underground or mineralize it and put it. But I think it's even more exciting if you can turn it into something useful as a feedstock for fuels, materials, etc. And we're working on all of those things with partners. So that would be my number one pick, because I think we've got to do it, and I think we are getting increasing clarity on how we will deploy quantum computing for those two parts of the picture. But then another Philip over here just put in a proposal the other day to the US government for conversion of methane into methanol, where the analysis shows that it could reduce effective CO2 emissions by 2% globally. So that's just one application, one catalyst. We've heard a fair bit about lithium-ion batteries today. To my provocation about chemistry, no one on planet Earth understands how a lithium-ion battery works in full. We've all got one in our pocket, at least, and yet we don't understand how they work. There's chemistry going on at the interface between the electrodes and the small molecules in the electrolyte. How do you design a better version of something that you don't understand how it works? Well, that's the blacksmith's workshop with the F-35s or the pharmaceutical industry. The same applies, solar cells, perovskite solar cells, very exciting prospect of, twice as efficient, half the price solar cells. It changes, to the earlier conversation, changes the whole supply chain and the whole economics around solar cells, and could end up anywhere in the world if you're changing the whole supply chain. And so the list goes on. Green hydrogen production, clean ammonia production. it's suddenly, and by the way, I'm going to just elaborate very briefly, and then I'll stop talking. If you want to try and get a picture of why quantum computing is going to have such a profound impact on these technologies, then it's harder to do in a big city like this, but you really only just need to look out the window at Mother Nature. So Mother Nature got the same chemistry set that we humans got. And what she did is she used billions of years of evolution to do things that are actually full-scale miracles compared to what we can do with chemistry. So in the longer term, there's no reason why anything that you can't see life doing that we in principle can't do. And indeed, one of the things that Mother Nature is an absolute grand master of is catalysis. We call them enzymes when they're biological. And that's how we have a functioning system right here. That's how the entire world works, is doing chemistry in an unbelievably efficient way. A way that it's sort of like Aikido or something. You know, you have these enzymes or catalysts that aren't participating in the reaction, but cause it to go many orders of magnitude faster than it otherwise would. And the way you do that is you either do trial and error for billions of years, or you get a quantum computer and you simulate for the first time how that works.
A fascinating thought, really. Now you have here 150 people approximately, all leaders in the field, investors, technology leaders, corporate leaders. Probably they want to understand how can they use quantum computing to take action. So what would be your recommendation to them?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think the first thing is to appreciate that it's coming very quickly. I've mentioned that, you know, our first million-qubit scale systems will come online in 2027 and 2028, respectively. The work that needs to happen between now and then is real, substantial technical work. It's computational chemists sitting down with, you know, quantum algorithm experts, for example, and figuring out of your favorite problem, whether that's in, you know, battery chemistry or the chemistry of cement or whatever it is, how to fit that onto those first systems. I believe that we need, you know, we have had startups and organizations for decades that have been able to rely on future compute power, and we now have startups who can plan around future AI capabilities. We need to have a whole generation of organizations that are built on the understanding that quantum computing is imminent, and that's central to their business, so you all can help with that. But I think, you know, we are absolutely wide open to partnering with, you know, ambitious, visionary organizations who want to get this technology deployed to accelerate things, and you know, we'd love to participate in that. And I think just to bear in mind, I mean, I hope I've sketched a picture, right? Like, the value creation here is profound, right? Like, there's just so much that is going to come out of this, and there's plenty of value to be created, plenty of value to be shared. And I think maybe it seems to be a bit of a resonating theme here today that you know, you can do the right thing and have it be lucrative at the same time.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. I have lost track of time, I have to admit, so we don't have time for questions. Okay.